Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive, where we take the sources you provide and really try to pull out the key insights.
Exactly.
Today, we're diving into some really interesting data you shared about a very specific market, global hemlock
And
doors.
locked doors, right?
Our mission in this deep dive is basically to explore the global hemlock doors market analysis and forecast you gave us. We want to really understand the numbers, how big is this market and where does it seem to be headed?
hmm
So, just looking at the high-level picture from the source, the global market for these doors was valued at what, around $1.4 billion in 2021.
Yeah, 1,408 million, roughly.
Right, and that number is projected to grow to over $1.8 billion by 2025.
Okay.
And then look at this. It nearly doubles that 2021 value, reaching close to $3 billion by 2033.
Wow. Okay. Seeing that kind of growth trajectory for, what might seem like a niche product, it's pretty
It
fascinating.
really is.
That move from roughly 1.4 billion up to 3 billion over about a decade, well, that's a significant market expansion. The source points to a global compound annual growth rate, a CAGR, of about 6.5% for this period.
Right, the CAGR.
And you can think of KGR as like the average yearly growth rate, but smoothed out over time.
Exactly. So, okay, the overall market's growing 6.5% CAGR. But the real story, I think, is probably in the regional breakdown.
Usually is.
So let's dive into where this growth is actually happening. Maybe start with North America.
Sounds good. So the source shows North America as, well, a pretty substantial market, valued at nearly $394.4 million back in 2021,
Right.
projected to reach over 494.6 million by 2025, and then it's approaching 791.7 million by 2033.
So still growing nicely. What's the regional CGR there?
It's around 6.1%, so slightly below the global average, but still very solid growth.
Right. And within North America, I assume the U.S. is the biggest piece.
Yeah, naturally. It accounted for, let's see, about 305.6 million in 2021.
Okay.
And it's expected to reach over 600.8 million by 2033. That's a CAGR of around 5.9%.
Okay, so steady. What about Canada?
Canada also shows, pretty steady growth, moving from about 34.8 million up to over 76.2 million in that same period. Its CAGR is actually a bit higher, 6.5%.
Interesting.
But, here's where it gets really interesting in North America, and it's kind of a pattern we might see elsewhere.
Mhm.
You have areas showing particularly dynamic growth.
Okay.
Mexico. While it's starting from a smaller base, right?
Yeah.
About 25.2 million in 2021.
Uh-huh.
It's projected to, well, explode is maybe a strong word, but grow significantly to over 75.8 million by 2033.
Wow. And look at that CAGR. The source puts Mexico's growth rate at over 8.8%.
Yeah.
That's significantly higher than the US or Canada. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Like, what could be driving such strong demand for hemlock doors, specifically in Mexico, compared to its neighbors? Could it be, I don't know, specific trends in construction material?
It definitely points to some specific underlying economic or construction sector dynamics that are probably unique to Mexico that the data is picking up on.
Yeah.
It's the kind of detail these reports can really reveal, even in categories that seem, pretty specific.
Okay, fascinating. Let's move across the Atlantic then. Europe. What's the picture there?
So Europe, the source values this market at about 326.8 million in 2021,
Okay.
projected to grow to nearly 647.8 million by 2033. The regional CAGR here is about 6.0%, so again, pretty close to the North American rate.
Right. In Europe, I noticed in the data you provided, it's quite fragmented, lists a lot of individual countries.
It does, yeah, lots of detail here. We see kind of moderate growth rates across many of the big Western European nations.
Right.
Well, for instance, Germany, which is the largest European market listed here,
Yeah.
it's expected to grow from about 63.1 million to 114.6 million by 2033. That's a CAGR of 5.3%.
Okay.
France shows a pretty similar pace, from about 49 million up to 86.8 million, so that's a 5.1% TAGR.
And the UK.
The UK is slightly slower,
Mm-hmm.
around 5.0%. It goes from 42.8 million up to 74.5 million.
Okay. So those are the big three sort of steady growers. Then you have countries like Italy, Russia, Spain, Sweden. They seem to be clustered a bit lower.
That's right. Their CAGRs are all ranging from just over 3.6% for Sweden up to just under 4.8% for Italy. Russia and Spain are in between there.
Got it.
And Denmark really stands out, but on the lower end in Europe, its market is projected to grow from about 12.7 million to only 14.9 million by 2033.
Wow. That's quite slow.
Yeah, it gives it a pretty modest CAGR of around 1.7%. That's quite low compared to the others.
What about Switzerland and Luxembourg?
They show more moderate growth rates. Switzerland's around 4.1% CAGR, and Luxembourg is about 2.5%.
Okay. But hang on. The most striking number in the European section, maybe in the whole report you sent, is for the rest of Europe category.
Okay, that one.
This wasn't defined in the source, I don't think, but the numbers, they're dramatic. Starting from a really small base, just under $2 million in 2021.
Yeah, tiny.
This category is projected to skyrocket to over $107.5 million by 2033.
It's an astonishing jump, isn't it? That represents a CAGR of over 16.8%.
16.8%.
Yeah. I mean, this implies really rapid, maybe very targeted adoption or development of the hemlock door market in countries within Europe that weren't individually listed.
It just raises another one of those fascinating questions, doesn't it? Like, is this tied to specific reconstruction efforts somewhere? Or maybe a sudden surge in popularity for certain architectural styles? Or maybe the emergence of new manufacturing or distribution hubs in these, unnamed areas?
Could be any of those.
Yeah.
That level of growth from such a small base is something you rarely see. It's a huge outlier.
Wow. Okay, yeah, that is a serious outlier. All right, let's shift focus. Asia Pacific. This was actually the largest regional market back in 2021, right?
That's correct. Valued at around $484.5 million then.
And it's forecast to reach nearly $990 million by 2033.
Yeah, so still projected to be the largest region overall. It's growing at a regional CAGR of just over 6.1%. Again, pretty close to that North American and European average.
And who's leading the charge there? China?
China is definitely the dominant force here, yeah. Starting at $186.5 million and projected to reach over $434 million by 2033.
Okay, and the CAGR?
Strong. 7.1%. That's actually the highest large country CDR we've seen so far in the major economies listed.
Right. Okay. What about Japan and India? Also big markets listed.
Yep, major markets too. Japan is growing from about 93.5 million to 178.1 million. It's a 5.5% CGR. And India from 78 million up to 146.5 million, which is a 5.4% CAGR. So very similar growth rates for those two.
Okay. And then there are other key countries in APAC. South Korea, Australia, Singapore. How are they looking?
They show more moderate CGRs. Let's see. South Korea is around 4.9%. Australia is about 4.7%. And Singapore is around 3.8%. So respectable growth, but not quite at the China-Japan-India level.
Gotcha. And who's at the lower end in Asia Pacific?
Well, the source lists Southeast Asia as a category with a CGR of just over 2.1%.
Okay.
And Taiwan actually shows the lowest regional growth rate in the whole report, I believe. It's got a CGR of just 1.1%. Moving from about 15.5 million up to only 18.8 million by 2033.
Wow, 1.1%. That's even lower than Denmark.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Very slow growth projected there. The rest of APAC category, though, shows a more typical 5% CGR.
All right, let's head south now. South America. How's that region shaping up?
South America. This region was valued at about 95.8 million in 2021.
Okay, so smaller than the others we've discussed.
Definitely. And it's expected to reach around 156 million by 2033. The regional CGR here is about 4.4%, so a bit lower than North America, Europe, and APAC.
Right. And Brazil's the biggest market there, I assume.
Correct. Brazil is projected to grow from about 39.6 million to nearly 62 million. That's a 4.1% CGR.
Right.
Interestingly, Argentina shows a more dynamic growth rate. It's nearly 5.9% CAGR, moving from 17.8 million up to 35.2 million.
Huh. Another case of a neighbor outpacing the larger economy in terms of growth rate.
Seems like it. Other countries listed, like Colombia, Peru, and Chile, they show CAGRs sort of clustered between 2.5% and 3.6%.
Okay. And let me guess. Is there a rest of South America category showing high growth?
You guessed it. Mirroring the pattern we saw elsewhere, the rest of South America, despite starting small at 2.4 million in 2021, is projected for substantial growth, over 16.3 million by 2033. That's a high CAGR of almost 12%.
Wow, 12%. Okay, so again, it indicates these pockets of really rapid expansion in perhaps smaller or unnamed markets within the region?
Exactly that. It's a consistent theme in this data you provided.
Okay, two more regions to go. Middle East.
Right, Middle East. This region's market is valued at about 70.4 million in 2021, growing to around 102 million by 2033.
Okay, and the growth rate?
Its regional TGR is actually one of the lower ones overall, coming in at 3.4%.
Okay, and the source lists several countries here. Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia is the largest, yes. At 22.1 million in 2021, growing to 30.4 million by 2033, that's about a 3.0% CAGR,
Right. Turkey and the UAE.
Slightly slower KDRs there. Turkey's around 2.8%, and the UAE is about 2.7%.
Okay, Egypt and Qatar.
Also showing pretty modest growth rates. Egypt's around 2.5% CAGR, and Qatar's about 2.2%.
So generally, slower growth across the board there for the listed countries.
It seems so. But again, similar to other regions, the rest of Middle East category, well, it shows a higher KGR than the individually listed countries.
Let me guess, quite a bit higher.
Yep, growing from 5.4 million to nearly 16 million with a 7.9% CAGR.
Yeah.
So still significant growth happening somewhere in the region.
Okay. Finally, the region that the source really highlights for growth, Africa.
Yes, Africa. This market, while it was the smallest globally, just 36.6 million in 2021.
Tiny, yeah.
It's projected to become significantly larger, reaching over $311.8 million by 2033.
Whoa, that's a huge jump.
It really is. This represents Africa's regional CAGR at over 14.3%.
14.3.
Yes. That's the highest regional growth rate globally in this entire report. This market is undergoing really rapid expansion for this specific product category.
That's incredible. And is the growth concentrated or widespread?
It seems pretty widespread across the key countries listed. Nigeria, for example, is forecast for tremendous growth, from 16.2 million up to 132.9 million.
Wow. What's the AGR?
14%. 14.0%.
Okay. And South Africa?
South Africa shows a very similar trajectory, moving from 14.2 million up to 116.3 million, also a 14.0% CAGR, essentially.
Amazing. Almost identical, very high growth rates.
Exactly. And the rest of Africa category isn't trailing either. It actually shows the highest growth within the continent, nearly 15.7% CAGR.
15.7.
Yeah, growing from about 6.2 million up to 62.7 million. So this data you shared clearly points to Africa as a major emerging market for Hemlock Doors with really widespread high-rate growth.
So, okay, let's try and wrap this up. What does this whole deep dive into the source material you provided really tell us?
Well, I think the main takeaway is that the global Hemlock Doors market, while it might sound specific, it's actually undergoing pretty substantial growth, projected to more than double in value over the next decade or so.
Right, from that roughly $1.4 billion in 2021 to almost $3 billion by 2033.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's definitely not a uniform expansion across the globe.
No, clearly not.
The data you provided really highlights these specific hotspots of rapid growth, most notably, the entire continent of Africa.
Yeah, that 14.3% CAGR is huge.
Absolutely. But also those interesting pockets within other regions, like that dramatic surge in the rest of Europe.
That's 16.8%.
And Mexico's high CAGR in North America, plus those high restive categories in South America and the Middle East.
Right. And conversely, you've got some seemingly mature markets like Denmark and Taiwan showing really slow growth, very different stories playing out.
It truly illustrates how digging into the numbers, even for a seemingly niche market like Hemlock Doors, can reveal these fascinating global patterns and significant regional differences in maybe construction trends, material preferences, or perhaps just underlying economic energy.
Yeah, absolutely. It does raise those important questions about what's driving these specific trends, doesn't it?
It really does. Like, for you, thinking about this data, what specific factors, is it cost? Is it durability, maybe aesthetic preference, or just the availability of the hemlock wood itself? What's fueling such massive growth for these doors in Africa, for example, compared to the much more modest pace in places like Denmark or Taiwan?
Yeah.
Thinking about those drivers kind of connects these numbers back to the real world of building and development,
It really gives you a lot to think about, doesn't it? Well, thank you for providing the source material for this deep dive. It was honestly a great way to explore the really diverse trajectory of this specific market.
No problem. It was genuinely insightful to sort of uncover these different regional stories hidden within the data you shared.
We hope this deep dive into the Hemlock Doors market was valuable for you, the listener. Keep those sources coming. We look forward to our next deep dive based on the material you provide.
Okay, let's dive right into the Hemlock Doors market. You shared this really interesting market analysis with us.
Yes.
And our mission today really is to unpack it. We want to figure out what's driving this specific market, what the sort of hurdles are, and where it seems to be heading. And we're sticking strictly to the information you provided in that analysis.
Right.
Hemlock Doors maybe sounds a bit niche.
Yeah.
But according to this material, it's actually a rapidly growing part of the whole construction scene.
It is, yeah. And what's fascinating looking at this analysis is seeing how one specific material, like hemlock, can really carve out its own space,
Right.
build its own momentum within a huge sector like construction. This source gives us a pretty clear view of the dynamics from several different angles.
Okay, great. So let's start there. The big question. What's making hemlock doors so popular right now? What are the key drivers that this analysis highlights?
Well, the first major factor it points to is definitely its aesthetic appeal and design versatility.
Ah, okay. The look and feel.
Exactly. The wood itself, it's described as having this really consistent grain, a nice pale color, and a lovely smooth texture.
Which makes it easy to work with.
Incredibly adaptable, yeah. The source says it's perfect for painting, staining, or even, detailed carving.
Ah, so you could get that really sleek, minimalist, modern look, or go totally traditional and ornate with it.
Precisely. Whether a project needs that clean, modern feel or something much more traditional, maybe more detailed, hemlock can apparently fit right in.
Hmm.
And this adaptability, the source notes, is a big reason it's becoming a favorite for like upscale homes and those high-end renovation projects.
Right, where the finish and the little details are super
Yeah,
important.
they're paramount.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
If you're investing heavily in custom interiors, you need something that takes finish as well. Okay, what else? Besides the aesthetics, what else is driving demand?
Another pretty significant driver mentioned is sustainability and durability. The analysis talked about this growing environmental awareness, among consumers, builders.
Yeah, that's everywhere now.
It is. And materials sourced from, say, responsibly managed forests are gaining real traction. Hemlock, which the source says primarily comes from North American forests,
Right.
well, it fits this description, so it's benefiting from that whole trend.
It's interesting, though, because it's known for being lightweight, isn't it?
Right.
But the source says it's strong.
That's the kind of key combination. It is lightweight, which helps with installation, obviously.
Sure.
But the analysis states it's also strong enough. It's well suited for both solid door constructions and engineered door types, too.
Okay.
So, for architects or designers needing both sustainability and performance, Hemlock seems to check those boxes, according to this info.
And it's not just for houses either, is it? The source mentioned other growth areas,
Correct. Yeah, there's a noticeable expansion happening in the commercial and hospitality sectors.
like hotels, resorts.
Exactly. Hotels, resorts, even high-end corporate offices, they're looking for wooden doors that, yes, look premium, feel premium,
Hmm.
but can also, stand up to more traffic, heavier use.
Right. Durability again.
And the analysis specifically mentions Hemlock's dimensional stability and its ease of use as reasons architects are choosing it, especially when they're aiming for those high-end customized finishes in these bigger projects.
Okay, so summing up the drivers, aesthetic flexibility, good for sustainability goals, strong enough for different builds, and useful in commercial spaces too. That's a strong list.
It is.
But okay, let's look at the flip side now. Every market has challenges. What does this analysis identify as the main headwinds, the restraints for hemlock doors?
Well, one significant challenge highlighted is its susceptibility to moisture, and, related to that, lower decay resistance compared to some other wood.
Compared to woods like, what, cedar, mahogany?
Yeah, exactly. Woods like cedar or mahogany are naturally more resistant. Hemlock, the source says, doesn't handle moisture quite as well inherently, particularly in, very humid places or if you're thinking about exterior use.
And what's the consequence of that, practically speaking?
Well, it often means it needs extra help, like additional chemical treatments to boost its resistance.
Okay.
Or in some situations, builders might just choose a different material altogether, one with better natural durability built in.
So that vulnerability could limit where it gets used.
It definitely can, yeah. It can limit its application range and sort of impact its appeal for certain kinds of projects.
Okay, so moisture is one factor. What about the supply side? Getting the actual wood.
That's another constraint the source brings up. Fluctuations in timber prices and sometimes just limited availability.
Right.
Because the high-quality hemlock, as we said, mainly comes from specific regions, North America mostly. The supply is quite dependent on things like logging rules, forestry yields, even, weather and environmental factors. It creates a dependency.
Which must make planning and budgeting a bit tricky.
Exactly. That volatility in the supply chain can push production costs up for the manufacturers, which then makes pricing unpredictable for the buyers. And that's obviously a challenge when you're trying to budget major construction work.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, and finally, hemlock isn't the only option out there. Competition. What alternatives does the source flag as major competitors?
Yes, the analysis points to growing competition from engineered and synthetic alternatives.
Like MDF, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Materials like MDF, medium density fiberboard, HDF, which is high density fiberboard, and various composite doors. They're significant players.
And what's their advantage, according to the source? Why choose them over hemlock?
Well, it lists a few key benefits they often have. Often better moisture resistance straight out of the box compared to untreated hemlock. Lower production costs, usually,
Yeah.
and higher uniformity. Less variation from one door to the next.
Just a consistency.
Right. And these alternatives, it says, are particularly popular in large-scale housing developments or maybe institutional projects.
Their volume and cost effectiveness are key.
Precisely, where consistency and cost are paramount. So, yeah, that makes it tougher for natural hemlock doors to compete purely on price or maybe moisture performance in those specific high-volume markets.
Okay, so you've got the wood's own limits with moisture, the supply chain being sensitive, and then these cheaper, often more uniform competitors. It's definitely a nuanced picture, isn't it?
It is.
Right, let's shift gears then. Despite these challenges, where is the market actually going? What are the emerging trends shaping the future here, according to the analysis?
This is where it gets interesting, seeing how the market adapts. One of the biggest trends identified is a really strong push towards interior customization and personalization.
People wanting unique stuff.
Exactly. The analysis says homeowners and designers are increasingly asking for doors that aren't just standard off-the-shelf options. They want something that reflects a unique style.
So things like, bespoke finishes, special panel designs, maybe detailed carvings.
Precisely those things.
Yeah.
Custom finishes, bespoke paneling, intricate artistic carvings, those are the examples given.
Okay.
And this is where hemlock really shines, apparently. Its fine grain and ease of machining make it particularly well-suited for this kind of detailed custom work.
Right.
The source notes this trend is especially strong in, the luxury home market and high-end renovations.
So its workability is a perfect match for that desire for unique, premium looks.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What about the sustainability angle we talked about earlier? Is that still playing a role as a trend?
Oh, absolutely. It comes back strong as a major trend. There's a significant rise, it says, in demand for eco-certified wood products.
Okay.
The analysis specifically mentions certifications like FSC labels Forest Stewardship Council.
Yep, familiar with those. And green building standards like LEED and BREEAM, these are widely recognized benchmarks for sustainable construction.
And are these certifications becoming, requirements now rather than just nice-to-haves?
The source suggests they increasingly are, yeah. Particularly for public sector projects, and also certain private developments are mandating them.
Mm-hmm.
So what that means is hemlock doors that actually have these certifications, they're gaining real traction.
Right.
Especially, it notes, in government-backed developments and institutional building projects where meeting green standards isn't optional anymore. It's shifting from a consumer preference to a project necessity.
That's a powerful driver.
Yeah.
Okay, and what about tech? Doors aren't just simple barriers anymore, are they?
Exactly right. The analysis points to another trend involving smart technology integration and also acoustic innovation.
Acoustic, like soundproofing.
Yeah, improving sound dampening. So hemlock doors are increasingly being paired with features like better acoustic insulation. And on the tech side, integrated smart lock systems for security and connectivity.
So you get the nice feel of the natural wood, but with modern features built in.
Yes, it's all about blending that form and function. This trend really caters to, today's homeowners and developers.
Mm-hmm.
They want doors that aren't just beautiful and fit the design, but also actually perform, keeping things quiet, being secure with the latest locks, maybe integrating with a smart home system.
Adds extra value.
It adds layers of value, yeah, beyond just being a door.
Okay, so if we try and pull all this together, based just on the source material you shared, what seems to be emerging is a picture of the Hemlock Doors Market.
Mm-hmm.
That, it faces real challenges, moisture, competition from synthetics.
Mm-hmm.
But it's finding significant growth by leaning into its strengths, right?
Yeah.
Like its workability for high-end looks and customization.
Yes.
And it's actively being shaped by adapting to these modern demands like verifiable sustainability, through eco-certifications and weaving in technology.
That sums it up very well, I think. The analysis paints a picture of a market driven by its sort of intrinsic aesthetic flexibility and that customization potential,
Right.
while navigating those material limits and competitive pressures we discussed. But ultimately, its future growth seems really strongly tied to personalization, those verified eco-credentials, and integrating functional tech.
This really surfaces an important thought, maybe for you, the listener, to consider based on these trends we've just discussed. How might this increasing demand for both advanced technology and these strict sustainability standards,
Mhm.
how might that fundamentally change what we even think of as a door in the years ahead?
That's a great point.
According to the insights right here in this analysis, it feels like we could be on the verge of seeing natural materials like hemlock seamlessly merged with cutting-edge function, verifiable green performance, in ways that could really redefine the humble door.
Indeed. The analysis definitely hints at a future where the door is maybe less of a simple physical barrier and more of an active, integrated part of a building's overall intelligence, its security, and its environmental footprint.
Fascinating stuff. Well, that was a really insightful deep dive into the Hemlock Doors market, all thanks to the comprehensive source material you brought to us today.
It was a great analysis to dig into. Thanks for sharing it.